Chapter 1. Stay quiet. If you've ever sat at a long glass conference table and felt invisible, you know the kind of silence I'm talking about. Not the peaceful kind, the suffocating kind, the kind where your ideas are good, maybe even better than good, but your title is too small to let them breathe. My name is Claire Donovan. I'm 34 years old, born and raised in Columbus, Ohio, and for the past 4 years I've been an executive assistant at Halpern & Rowe Consulting in downtown Chicago. Executive assistant, not strategist, not analyst, not director, just assistant at least. That's what my boss liked to remind me. His name is Daniel Mercer. Senior partner. Ivy League. Perfect suits. Perfect smile. The kind of man who says, "We're a family here," and then schedules meetings at 7 a.m. on Sundays. For 2 years, I organized his calendar, rewrote his emails, fixed his slide decks, and quietly corrected financial projections before they ever reached a client. I knew the company's numbers better than some of the VPs, but in meetings, I poured the water that I handed out folders that I took notes, and I stayed quiet, until the Henderson account. The Henderson Group was our biggest potential client in 5 years, a national retail chain on the edge of bankruptcy. If we landed them, the firm would double its revenue. If we lost them, we'd be laying people off by winter. Daniel had been working on the proposal for weeks. I knew because I'd stayed late every night formatting the slides he kept rewriting. The problem? His strategy was wrong, not morally wrong. Not even embarrassingly wrong, just outdated. That he wanted to cut 30% of Henderson's workforce, close underperforming stores, and restructure leadership. Classic cost-slashing turnaround plan, but I'd spent nights analyzing their regional data. Their stores weren't failing because of payroll, they were failing because corporate had abandoned community engagement. Online engagement was up. Local loyalty was down. The numbers weren't screaming, "Cut." They were whispering, "Reconnect." I built an alternative model. Quietly. At home. On my own laptop. A hybrid recovery plan, community reinvestment, localized marketing, digital loyalty expansion. It showed slower initial savings, but stronger long-term stabilization. By year 3, profits exceeded Daniel's projection by 18%. That I didn't plan to present it. That I just needed to prove to myself that I wasn't crazy. That Tuesday morning, the boardroom was colder than usual. Chicago winter pressed against the glass windows, turning the skyline pale and distant. The Henderson executives sat on one side of the table. Our leadership team on the other. Daniel stood at the front, remote in hand, confident. Polished slide after slide of projected cuts. "Efficiency is the only path forward," he said smoothly. "Aggressive restructuring ensures survival." I watched the Henderson CFO, a woman in her late 50s with sharp eyes, lean back slightly, not convinced. That I could feel it. Daniel moved to the final slide. Projected recovery timeline, 24 months. That he smiled. "Any questions?" The room was quiet, then the CFO spoke. "What happens," she asked calmly, "if morale collapses before month 12? A flicker crossed Daniel's face. Brief. Almost invisible. "We anticipate manageable resistance," he replied. "Manageable resistance, like people are weather." The CFO didn't look satisfied, and that's when something inside me shifted. That I don't know if it was exhaustion. Or frustration. Or 2 years of biting my tongue, but I heard my own voice before I fully decided to speak. "There's another approach." The words hung there, soft, but undeniable. Every head turned. Daniel's included. His smile froze. Not gone, just tightened. "I'm sorry," he said lightly. My heart was pounding so hard I thought they could hear it against the table. "I've been analyzing Henderson's regional engagement metrics," I continued. My voice steadied as I went. Store closures might accelerate the decline instead of stabilizing it. Daniel's jaw flexed. I stood up. "I don't even remember deciding to stand." "I built an alternative model," I said. One focused on community reinvestment and digital retention. Silence. The Henderson CEO leaned forward. "Do you have the numbers?" I did. Printed. In my bag. For a split second, Daniel and I locked eyes, and that's when he said it. "Claire," he said, his tone no longer polished. No longer warm, sharp. "Stay quiet." Not loud, not yelling, just controlled, measured, public. The words sliced clean through the room. Stay quiet, like I was a child interrupting adults, like I had overstepped, like I didn't belong at the table I had helped prepare. The air shifted, you could feel it. The Henderson CFO's eyes moved slowly from Daniel to me. No one spoke, not the VPs, not the CEO, not the board. The room froze. And in that frozen second, I had two choices: sit down. Or continue. My hands were trembling, but something deeper had gone. Still, that if I sat down now, I would sit down forever. So I reached into my bag, and I pulled out the model. I understand, I said calmly, placing the printed packets on the table. But the data suggests something different. Daniel's face changed, not anger, not yet, something more dangerous: calculation. The Henderson CEO took the packet from my hand, and began reading. The room didn't thaw. It transformed, because now it wasn't just about strategy. It was about control, and for the first time in 2 years, I wasn't pouring the water. I was holding the numbers, and Daniel Mercer knew it. Chapter 2. The silence after no one tells you what public humiliation actually sounds like. It doesn't echo. It doesn't explode. It compresses. After Daniel said, "Stay quiet," the silence didn't feel empty. It felt pressurized, like the air in the room had thickened, like everyone was holding something they weren't sure they wanted to release. The Henderson CEO lowered his eyes to the packet in his hands, and he kept reading. That was the first crack in Daniel's control. I stayed standing. I don't know how. My legs felt detached from my body, like they belonged to someone braver. Daniel let out a quiet chuckle. "I apologize," he said smoothly to the clients. "Claire is very dedicated. Sometimes passion outruns protocol." Protocol, the word landed harder than "stay quiet." Because it reframed me. Not as insightful. Not as analytical. As inappropriate. The Henderson CFO didn't smile. She flipped a page. "These projections extend to 36 months, she said, scanning the document. "You're forecasting retention growth instead of contraction." "Yes," I answered before I could second-guess myself. "Because contraction accelerates brand erosion in already fragile markets." Daniel's voice cut in. "That's speculative." I turned toward him, respectfully, but directly. "It's data from their Midwest pilot region last year." Page 4. The CFO flipped. There it was. A faint hum of shifting chairs moved around the table. Daniel's hand tightened around the remote. I could see the muscle in his jaw pulse once. That he wasn't used to being contradicted, especially not by me. The Henderson CEO looked up. "Why wasn't this included in the official proposal?" The question wasn't sharp, but it was lethal. Daniel didn't miss a beat. "Because it carries higher short-term risk," he replied. "Our responsibility is to recommend the most stable path." I inhaled slowly. "With respect," I said, keeping my tone even, "stability without loyalty is temporary." Silence again, but this time it wasn't frozen. It was thinking. The CFO leaned back in her chair. "Claire," she said, and the fact that she used my name sent a flicker of heat through my chest. "Walk us through your model." Daniel turned toward me fully now, not smiling, not performing, watching, measuring. This was the moment he could shut it down completely. He could override me. End the discussion. Reassert hierarchy. Instead, he did something worse. He stepped aside. "By all means," he said, gesturing toward the screen. It looked gracious. It wasn't. It was a test. If I stumbled, I'd prove his point. If I hesitated, I'd confirm I didn't belong there. My laptop was already in my bag. I hadn't planned to use it, but apparently, some part of me had. I walked to the front of the room, aware of every sound. The click of my heels, the faint buzz of the overhead lights, the low rumble of traffic 16 floors below. I plugged in. My hand stopped shaking the second the first slide appeared. Because numbers don't care about hierarchy, they either work. Or they don't. This model reallocates 15% of the projected layoff budget, I began, my voice clearer now, into localized marketing partnerships and community-based incentives. Slide change. Instead of closing underperforming stores immediately, we restructure leadership incentives and tie executive bonuses to regional recovery metrics. Another slide. Digital engagement in Henderson's top 10 declining markets is up 12% year over year. The demand exists. The connection doesn't. I didn't rush. I didn't apologize. I just explained. Halfway through, I stopped noticing Daniel entirely. The Henderson team started asking questions, real ones. Detailed ones. What about supply chain strain? How do we manage investor expectations? What's the PR angle? And I had answers, not perfect answers, but informed ones. By the time I finished, the room felt different, warmer, not friendly, but awake. The Henderson CEO folded his hands. "Daniel," he said evenly, "we'd like both models sent to us. We'll review internally." "Both models," Daniel nodded, "of course." The meeting adjourned 5 minutes later, polite handshakes. Professional smiles, but under the surface, something irreversible had happened. As the Henderson team exited, the CFO paused beside me. "You should have a different title," she said quietly, then she walked out, the door closed, and the temperature dropped 10 degrees. No clients now. No audience, just our leadership team. Daniel didn't look at me immediately. He gathered his papers slowly. Methodically, the VPs avoided eye contact. Finally, he spoke, "In my office." Not loud, not angry, worse, controlled. I followed him down the hallway, aware of the subtle shift in how people looked at me, not dismissive, not admiring, curious. His office door shut with a soft click, the skyline stretched behind him, gray and sharp. He removed his jacket. "You embarrassed me," he said calmly. "I presented data. You undermined me. I offered an alternative. You're an assistant." There it was again, title as boundary, title as cage. I met his gaze. "I'm also the person who corrected the Henderson revenue sheet 3 weeks ago." A pause. He hadn't known I knew that. "I'm the one who flagged the Midwest engagement numbers." Silence. His expression shifted, not to anger. To recognition, not of my value. Of the threat. "You overstepped," he said finally. "I spoke when the client showed doubt. You spoke without permission. And that was the real issue, not the numbers, not the strategy." Controlled. He walked around his desk slowly. "You're very good at what you do, Claire. But there's a reason hierarchy exists." "Yes," I said quietly. "Usually it's because someone earned it." The words were out before I could soften them. His eyes sharpened. "Be very careful," he said. A warning, not a threat. "Not yet." He sat down. "You will not present in future meetings without explicit approval. Is that understood?" This was the moment. Push further, and risk everything, comply, and shrink back into invisibility. I thought about the Henderson CFO. "You should have a different title." "I understand," I said evenly, which wasn't the same as agreeing. Daniel studied me for a long second. "Good," he replied, dismissed. I walked out of his office with my pulse steady and my mind racing. By the time I reached my desk, 3 emails were waiting. Point 1 from a VP *, impressive analysis today, *1 from a junior analyst *, did you really build that model yourself, and 1 from an unknown address, subject line ***, Henderson follow-up ***. I opened it. It was from the CFO, short, direct, **, Claire, I'd like to schedule a call with you later this week to discuss your projections in more detail. Please confirm availability, *, not Daniel. I stared at the screen, then I slowly closed my laptop, because this was no longer about a meeting. It was about momentum, and Daniel Mercer had just realized something dangerous. I didn't need permission to be capable. Chapter 3. The call I wasn't supposed to take. The email sat in my inbox for exactly 12 minutes before Daniel called me into his office again, not because he'd seen it, because he could feel it. Power shifts aren't loud at first. They move like pressure systems, subtle, atmospheric. The room changes before the forecast does. When I stepped into his office, he didn't look up immediately. He was on his phone, pacing slowly, speaking in that calm executive tone he used when he wanted to sound collaborative but authoritative. "Yes, we'll send both models," he was saying. "Of course. Full transparency." A pause, then, "No, Claire won't be necessary on that call. I'll walk you through the alternative myself." My pulse slowed, not sped up, slowed. He hung up and finally looked at me. "I assume you received the Henderson follow-up." It wasn't a question. "Yes. They've asked for clarification. I'll handle it." There it was, containment. "They asked to speak with me directly," I said evenly. A faint smile. "They don't know the internal structure here." "Internal structure," like I was an internal error. "They know who built the model," I replied. Silence. The skyline behind him was brighter today. Sun cutting through clouds. The kind of winter light that makes everything look sharper than it is. "You're ambitious," Daniel said finally. "I'm competent." His eyes flickered. "That call happens through me." He walked back behind his desk, signaling the conversation was over, but this time, something was different. He wasn't angry. He was recalculating. The Henderson CFO emailed again an hour later, * Claire, following up. Thursday at 2 p.m. works on our end. Please confirm, *, not CC to Daniel, not copy to anyone, just me. I stared at the screen, weighing risk against trajectory. If I forwarded it to Daniel, he'd take control. If I ignored it, I'd reinforce the hierarchy he depended on. If I accepted it, I'd be stepping fully into the space he'd told me to stay out of. I typed Thursday at 2 p.m. confirmed. I look forward to speaking with you. I hit send before fear could interrupt it. Thursday arrived colder than Tuesday. At 1:55 p.m., I booked a small conference room on the 12th floor, neutral territory. Not Daniel's domain. Not the main boardroom. My hands were steady now, not because I wasn't nervous, because I understood something new. That I wasn't trying to win, that I was trying to be accurate. At exactly 2 p.m., my phone rang. Claire Donovan. I answered. Margaret Ellis. The voice replied. Calm, measured. Thank you for making time. So that was her name, Margaret. I appreciate your interest, I said. I appreciate your courage, she corrected gently. That caught me off guard. I've been in boardrooms for 30 years, she continued. I recognize when someone speaks despite knowing it might cost them. Silence settled between us, but not heavy, observant. Tell me something honestly, she said. Was that model supported internally? There it was, the question beneath the question. No, I said. A beat. Was it discouraged? Yes. Another pause. Why present it anyway? I looked at the city through the glass wall, because I was tired of being quiet, because I knew it would work, because someone needed to say it, because your numbers deserved accuracy, I answered. Not emotional, not dramatic, just true. Margaret exhaled softly. Daniel's plan is safe, she said. Investors like safe. Safe can still fail, I replied. And your plan? Is riskier in the first year. But it stabilizes loyalty before cost. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, our board is divided. That meant something. If we choose your model, she continued, we would require you on the implementation advisory team. The words landed slowly. Require you, not Daniel. Me, I'm an executive assistant, I said carefully. You're a strategist without the title, she replied. The room felt smaller, brighter, dangerous. Would your firm support your involvement? She asked. I thought about Daniel's office, his warning. Be very careful. I don't know, I admitted. Find out, she said calmly. Because if we proceed, I won't accept a substitute. The line went quiet for half a second. Thank you, Claire. And then the call ended. I sat there for a full minute without moving. Then I did something strategic. I didn't go to Daniel. I went to human resources, not to complain. Ask a question. What's the formal process? I asked the HR director. For role reclassification based on expanded responsibilities. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. Are you anticipating a shift? I might be. She leaned back in her chair. That would require partner sponsorship. Of course it would. Document everything, she added. Performance metrics. Client feedback. Contribution scope. I nodded. I already had. At 4:17 p.m., Daniel received an email from Henderson's CEO. I know the exact time because I was CC'd. Daniel. After internal discussion, we are leaning toward the hybrid recovery model presented by Claire. We will confirm by Monday. Should we proceed, we will require her direct involvement in advisory oversight. No ambiguity. No softness. Daniel's office door remained closed for nearly an hour. When it finally opened, he stepped out with the same controlled expression he always wore. But something in his eyes had shifted. Not anger, not even resentment, recognition. Of leverage. Claire, he said from across the office floor. Not sharp, not warm, measured. My office. Again, but this time, people were watching. I stood slowly and walked toward him, aware of the quiet hum spreading through the department. Inside his office, he didn't sit immediately. They're leaning toward your model, he said. Yes. They're requesting you specifically. Yes. Silence stretched between us. You've put me in an interesting position, he said finally. I didn't respond. Understand this, he continued, voice low. If this succeeds, it reflects on the firm. And if it fails? I asked calmly. His gaze held mine. It reflects on you. Fair, terrifying, but fair. He walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. If Henderson confirms on Monday, he said slowly, we'll discuss next steps. Not will support you, not congratulations, discussed. I nodded, and for the first time since that meeting, I saw it clearly. He wasn't trying to silence me anymore. He was trying to decide whether to align with me, because the room hadn't just frozen that day. IT had shifted, and now the choice wasn't whether I should stay quiet. IT was whether he could afford for me to. Chapter 4. The test. Success doesn't feel like victory. IT feels like exposure. By the second week of the Henderson engagement, my name was on 3 internal memos, 2 client-facing documents, and 1 industry newsletter that mentioned Halpern and Rowe's innovative hybrid recovery model. Daniel made sure the firm's name came first. I didn't mind. Visibility wasn't about ego anymore. It was about leverage, but leverage invites resistance, and resistance arrived disguised as urgency. It started on a Wednesday at 6:40 my phone buzzed before my alarm. A message from Margaret Ellis, call me as soon as you're awake. It's urgent, my stomach tightened. I dialed immediately. Claire, she answered, skipping pleasantries. We have a problem. That's never a soft sentence in corporate America. Our largest investor reviewed the restructuring outline, she continued. He's threatening to pull capital unless we increase immediate cost cuts. Translation: layoffs, the very thing my model avoided in phase 1. How much is he demanding? I asked. An additional 12% workforce reduction within the first quarter. That would destabilize everything. Community reinvestment doesn't work when half the staff is gone. When does he need an answer? I asked. Tomorrow morning. Of course he did, because pressure is most effective when it's immediate. Send me the revised numbers he's referencing, I said. I'll run scenarios. I knew you would, she replied quietly. After we hung up, I sat on the edge of my bed for exactly 30 seconds, then I moved up. By 7:30 a.m., I was at my kitchen table with my laptop open, coffee untouched. I rebuilt projections with the proposed cuts. The results were ugly. Short-term profit spiked. Long-term collapse. Employee attrition exceeded sustainable thresholds by month 14. Brand trust cratered in 3 major markets. IT wasn't a strategy. IT was panic disguised as discipline. By 9:15 a.m. I was in the office. Daniel was already there. Of course he was. I knocked once and stepped inside. We have an investor issue, I said directly. He leaned back in his chair. I'm aware. That caught my attention. You spoke with them? At 7 a.m. Of course he had, and? I asked. They're concerned about risk exposure. They're concerned about optics, I corrected. He didn't argue. He just watched me. How much are they demanding? I asked. 12%. So Margaret had told him too, which breaks the model, I said. It adjusts the model. No, I replied calmly. It destroys the retention timeline. He stood slowly and walked toward the window. Claire, investors don't care about timelines. They care about confidence. And mass layoffs signal confidence? They signal control. There it was again, control, the same instinct that told me to stay quiet, only now it was scaled to capital markets. I stepped closer to his desk. I ran the projections, I said, placing printed sheets in front of him. If we cut 12% immediately, regional stability fails by Q3 next year. He scanned the pages. His expression didn't change, but he was reading carefully. You're assuming loyalty reacts linearly, he said. I'm assuming people react predictably when they're disposable. Silenced. He looked up. You're emotionally attached to this, he observed. No, I said evenly. I'm analytically consistent. A long pause. If we push back on the investor, he said slowly, and he withdraws capital, Henderson collapses before we can implement anything. And if we comply, I replied, we guarantee collapse 18 months later. The room was still. This wasn't about hierarchy anymore. IT was about philosophy. Daniel walked back behind his desk. What are you proposing? He asked. A shift. He wasn't dismissing. He was asking. We restructure the investor narrative, I said. We give them a visible cost control measure that doesn't touch frontline staff. He folded his arms. Such as? Executive compensation deferral. That made him blink. Temporarily reduce top-tier bonuses, I continued. Tie them to performance recovery milestones. It signals accountability without operational destabilization. He studied me carefully. You're suggesting leadership absorb the shock. Yes. That will not be popular. Neither is bankruptcy. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly, not amusement, recognition. You're asking Henderson's executives to sacrifice first. Yes. And you believe their board will agree? If framed correctly. He walked around the desk again. You'd need to present that personally, he said. There it was, the test, not whether I could build the model, whether I could defend it under fire. When's the investor call? I asked. Tomorrow. 9 a.m. Add me. He hesitated, just slightly. This was the moment, public alignment, or quiet containment. After a long second, he nodded once. To be ready, he said that. The next morning, I wasn't nervous that I was sharp that there's a difference. The call included Henderson's CEO, Margaret, 2 board members, the investor himself, Daniel, and me. The investor's voice came through cold and clipped. We need immediate cost reduction, he stated. Markets don't reward patience. Markets also don't reward volatility, I replied calmly. There was a pause. Who is this? He asked. Claire Donovan. Strategic advisory. Not assistant, not today. Daniel didn't correct it. That mattered. I've reviewed the 12% proposal, I continued. It generates a short-term earnings spike but increases attrition risk by 22% in high-sensitivity regions. He was quiet. Numbers force listening. We're recommending an executive compensation deferral tied to recovery benchmarks, I added. Leadership absorbs initial impact. Market confidence remains stable. Workforce morale remains intact. That's idealistic, he said flatly. It's structured, I replied. Daniel jumped in then. Our internal modeling supports her assessment. Her, not the team. Not vague, specific, aligned. The investor exhaled audibly. You're asking us to trust a longer runway. I'm asking you to protect your own return horizon, I said. Silence stretched across the line. Then Margaret spoke. Our board supports this revision. Another board member added, we agree. The investor didn't respond immediately. When he finally did, his tone had shifted, slightly less rigid. Fine. We'll reassess after Q2 metrics. Not enthusiasm, but not withdrawal. The call ended 5 minutes later. That I didn't move. Daniel closed his laptop slowly. That, he said, looking at me steadily, was well done. No sarcasm. No calculation, clear acknowledgement. You backed it, I replied. I did. And in that moment, the power dynamic shifted permanently, because he hadn't just allowed me to speak, that he had supported me publicly, which meant the room wasn't choosing sides anymore. That IT was recalibrating leadership. Later that afternoon, as I walked back to my desk, Brian stopped me again. That investor never backs down, he said quietly. He didn't, I replied. He adjusted. Brian shook his head slightly. You realize what just happened, right? I did, but I let him say it. You weren't filling space today, he said. You were defining it. I sat down slowly, the weight of that settling in. 2 weeks ago, I'd been told to stay quiet. Today, I had reshaped a capital decision, not because I demanded authority, but because I demonstrated value, and in rooms like ours, value, when undeniable, rewrites hierarchy. Daniel stepped out of his office around 5:30 p.m. Claire, he said, loud enough for the floor to hear. Let's review Q2 forecasting tomorrow. Tomorrow, not as assistant.as partner. People heard it, they always do, and this time, no one questioned whether I belonged at the table. Chapter 5. The woman who didn't stay quiet. 6 months later, the numbers told the story before anyone else did. Henderson's Q2 report exceeded revised projections by 4.8%, not explosive, not headline-grabbing, stable, sustainable. Exactly what we built it to be. Employee attrition remained below projected thresholds. Community engagement metrics rose in 8 of the top 10 recovery markets. Digital loyalty enrollment increased 17%. The investor who had demanded 12% layoffs, he requested a follow-up call to discuss long-term expansion positioning. Markets don't reward patience, but they do reward proof. The real shift happened on a Thursday morning in late September. Halpern and Rowe held its annual partner meeting. A formal, catered, full-floor event where promotions were announced and performance metrics were celebrated like trophies. That I wasn't supposed to be more than support staff at events like that. 6 months ago, I would have been coordinating name cards. This time, my name was on the agenda. Daniel stood at the front of the room. Composed as ever. He reviewed quarterly wins, strategic growth, new client acquisitions. Then he paused. As you all know, he began, the Henderson recovery engagement has exceeded first phase projections. A subtle ripple of approval moved through the room. He continued. The hybrid model required risk tolerance, internally and externally. He glanced in my direction. And leadership. The word hung there. Leadership, not assistance, not support, leadership. We are formalizing a new position, Daniel said. Director of Strategic Recovery Initiatives. A shift in the room. Chairs adjusting. Eyes scanning. This role will oversee high-risk, high-reward restructuring engagements moving forward. He paused again, deliberate. Claire Donovan has accepted the position. There it was, not temporary, not advisory, permanent. Applause rose. Professional at first, then warmer. I stood slowly, heart steady, because this wasn't surprise, this was consequence. When the applause faded, Daniel added something unexpected. At our initial Henderson meeting, Claire spoke up when she was advised not to. A soft murmur moved across the room. He didn't soften it. He didn't reframe it. He owned it. I told her to stay quiet, he said plainly. The room stilled, and she didn't. A small pause. Good thing. A ripple of restrained laughter, but beneath it, recognition, because everyone in that room understood what he was admitting. Authority isn't weakened by correction, it's strengthened by discernment. He gestured for me to come forward. I joined him at the front. 6 months ago, that walk would have felt impossible, now it felt earned. Would you like to say a few words? He asked. No test in his tone. No trap. Just space. I stepped toward the podium, looked out at the room that once expected me to pour water and take notes. I was told to stay quiet. I began. A few knowing smiles. I understand why. Honesty disarms faster than defiance. Hierarchy protects structure. Structure protects stability. I paused, but silence doesn't protect outcomes. The room was fully still now. I didn't speak up because I wanted attention, I continued. I spoke up because the numbers didn't align with the narrative. I let that settle. Titles matter, I said. But accountability matters more. I glanced briefly at Daniel, not challengingly, acknowledging. When data is clear, when strategy is sound, when conviction is earned, the room deserves to hear it. No dramatic crescendo. No theatrics, just truth. And if you ever find yourself at a table where you've done the work, run the numbers, carried the weight, don't wait for permission to contribute. A beat. Preparation is louder than hierarchy. Silence, then applause, not polite this time, certain. After the event, Margaret called. I heard about the promotion, she said. News travels fast. It travels when it's deserved. We spoke briefly about Q3 planning, then she added, almost casually, that first meeting? When he told you to stay quiet? I remember. The room didn't freeze, she said. It shifted. I smiled slightly. I know. Because I felt it. That moment wasn't humiliation. It was ignition. Later that evening, as the office emptied and the skyline turned gold against the glass, Daniel stepped into my new office, not large, but no longer borrowed space. You forced evolution, he said calmly. I forced alignment. I corrected. A faint smile. Do you regret it? He asked, speaking up, risking everything. Challenging him publicly. I considered the question seriously. No, I said. Do you? He looked out at the city lights. No, he replied, and that was the final shift. Not dominance, not rivalry, mutual recognition. People think the turning point was when I stood up in that first meeting. It wasn't. The turning point was when I decided that staying quiet would cost more than speaking. Silence is safe, until it isn't, and sometimes the most dangerous sentence in a room isn't shouted. It's controlled. Measured. Stay quiet. Because what follows that sentence defines everything. Fear. Or proof point. 6 months ago, I was an executive assistant holding a printed model and shaking hands. Today, I lead recovery strategy for a national firm, not because I defied authority recklessly, but because I understood something simple. If you've done the work, if you've earned the data, if you can defend the numbers, the room doesn't belong to hierarchy. It belongs to clarity, and clarity doesn't stay quiet.